I became a millionaire overnight. Then my best friend tried to steal everything. My greatest stroke of luck became my worst nightmare, and it all started with the person I called my brother. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Jordan, and I was 21 years old when my life split into two distinct parts, before the numbers and after. Before, I was a creature of routine and quiet desperation. My world was a revolving door of lectures at the local community college, greasy shifts at a downtown diner, and late nights spent in a cramped apartment I shared with two other students, the air thick with the scent of instant noodles and shared dreams of a life that didn't involve counting every single dollar. The weight of student loans was a constant, crushing pressure on my chest, a number so large it felt abstract, a monster lurking in my future. My only escape, my one true solace, was my friendship with Carter. We had grown up on the same street, built forts out of cardboard boxes, and shared secrets under the stars. He was more than a friend. He was the brother I never had. Our bond was forged in the fires of scraped knees, teenage heartbreaks, and the shared struggle of families with more love than money. He was working a dead-end warehouse job, drowning in debt from his father's failed business, a burden he carried with slumped shoulders and a forced smile that never quite reached his eyes. We made a pact, a half-joking, half-desperate promise that if either of us ever made it big, we'd pull the other up. It was a symbol of our loyalty, a sacred oath between two guys who had nothing but each other. The Tuesday it happened started like any other. I was on my break, scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the grumbling in my stomach. I had a few dollars left in my account, just enough for a lottery ticket. It wasn't a habit, just a whimsical act of defiance against the financial gloom that perpetually hung over me. I let the machine pick the numbers, a random splash of fate on a small slip of paper. I tucked it into my wallet and forgot about it, the ink smudging next to my worn-out student ID. 2 days later, while waiting for the bus, I saw the lottery numbers flashing on a news screen inside a bank lobby. On a whim, I pulled out the crumpled ticket. My heart didn't just stop, it seemed to implode. One by one, the numbers on the screen matched the numbers on my ticket. My hands began to shake so violently I could barely hold the flimsy piece of paper. I stumbled into the bank, my breath catching in my throat, and asked the teller to check it for me. Her eyes widened as she scanned it. Then she called her manager. The world became a blur of hushed voices, congratulatory handshakes, and a phone call to the lottery commission. The official number was $2.3 million. $2,300,000. The number echoed in my head, a surreal symphony. The first person I thought of, after the initial shock wore off and the reality began to seep in, was Carter. I didn't just see a way out of my own struggles, I saw a way out for him too. I saw us paying off our debts, starting a small business together, living the life we had always joked about. Our pact was no longer a fantasy, it was a blueprint for our future. That night, I met him at our usual spot, a quiet park overlooking the city lights. When I told him, his reaction was pure, unadulterated joy. He picked me up and spun me around, his laughter echoing into the night. He was as happy for me as if he had wanted himself. In that moment, looking at my best friend's ecstatic face, I knew with every fiber of my being that my life had changed for the better. The money was just a tool. The real prize was the freedom it would give us, the freedom to finally live without the constant gnaw of financial worry. A week later, after the initial press died down and the money was securely in my new bank account, I sat down with Carter. I didn't hesitate. I transferred $50,000 to his account, enough to clear his most pressing debts and give him a fresh start. He tried to refuse, tears welling in his eyes.
But I insisted. This was our dream, and I was just making it happen a little sooner. He hugged me, a long, silent embrace that spoke volumes. As I walked away from our meeting, a profound sense of rightness settled over me. I had done the right thing. I had honored our pact. But as I checked my phone later that night, I saw a single text from Carter. It wasn't a thank you. It was a question about the lottery's legal process, asking if my name was the only one on the winning ticket. A strange, cold prickle traced its way down my spine, a faint, discordant note in the symphony of my new life. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. I moved out of the cramped apartment and into a modest but comfortable condo in a safer part of town. I paid off my student loans in a single glorious transaction, a feeling of liberation so potent it was dizzying. I quit my job at the diner, the smell of grease forever replaced by the scent of new carpet and fresh paint. But amidst the personal upgrades, the foundation of my life, my friendship with Carter, began to show subtle hairline fractures. The text about the ticket was the first crack, but I dismissed it as simple curiosity. After all, it was a life-altering event. It was natural for him to have questions. But his behavior grew more peculiar. He started talking about managing my newfound wealth, dropping names of financial advisors and investment opportunities he'd supposedly found. He'd show up at my new place unannounced, his eyes scanning my belongings, not with envy, but with a strange, calculating appraisal. He began to distance himself from our old hangouts and our mutual friends, instead associating with a slicker crowd, people who talked about portfolios and offshore accounts. He was changing, shedding his old skin like a snake, and I felt like I was watching it happen from behind a pane of glass. The most painful change was in his relationship with my girlfriend, Sophia. Sophia and I had been dating for a year, a sweet, easygoing romance built on shared laughter and similar values. She was studying to be a nurse, a kind and grounded person who I thought saw me for who I was, not what I had. But Carter started spending more time with her, ostensibly to help her understand the new pressures I was facing. He'd plant seeds of doubt, insinuating that I was being reckless with my money, that I was letting the winnings go to my head. Soon, Sophia's demeanor shifted. Her warm smiles became tinged with concern. Her gentle questions about my day turned into interrogations about my spending. She started repeating Carter's phrases, telling me I needed to be smarter about my finances, that I was too trusting. It was a slow, methodical poisoning of the well, and I was drinking the water, confused and hurt by the sudden distance growing between us. I felt like I was losing them both, and I couldn't understand why. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Carter had asked me to drop by his apartment to sign some paperwork he claimed was related to a joint business venture he wanted us to start. He said it was just a preliminary agreement, something to show potential investors we were serious. His apartment was messier than usual, papers scattered across every surface. While he was in the kitchen grabbing us drinks, my eyes fell on a document left open on his desk. It was titled Co-Ownership Agreement. I scanned the contents, my blood running cold. It was a professionally drafted document, complete with legal jargon and forged signatures, that claimed Carter was a 50% co-owner of my lottery winnings. It stated that we had purchased the ticket together with pooled funds and that he was entitled to half of the total amount, less the initial $50,000 I had loaned him. The paper felt like ice in my trembling hands. This wasn't a preliminary business plan.
This was a meticulously crafted weapon. When Carter walked back into the room, I held up the document, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He didn't even flinch. He just smiled, a calm, practiced smile, and told me it was just a formality, a way to protect the money for us in case anything happened to me. He said it was for our future, for our business. His explanation was smooth, plausible, and utterly devoid of truth. But in that moment, a part of me, the part that still desperately wanted to believe in my best friend, wanted to accept it. I left his apartment in a daze, the forged document a heavy weight in my back. That evening, I tried to talk to Sophia about it, to tell her how scared and confused I was. But as I explained what I had found, her face hardened. She took Carter's side, telling me I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid. She said Carter was just trying to look out for me, that I was the one who was changing, becoming suspicious and untrusting. Standing in my own living room, surrounded by the things my new fortune had bought, I had never felt more alone. The two people I loved most in the world were united against me, and I was starting to question my own sanity. The feeling of isolation was a physical weight, a constant pressure on my chest. Sophia's words echoed in my mind, a relentless loop of self-doubt. Was I paranoid? Was I letting the money twist my perception of the people I loved? For a few days, I tried to convince myself that Carter was right, that it was all just a misunderstanding. I buried the document at the bottom of a drawer and tried to go back to normal. But normal was gone, shattered into a million pieces. Every interaction with Carter felt like a performance. He'd pat me on the back with one hand while I imagined the other reaching for my wallet. Sophia's touch felt distant, her kisses hollow. The trust that had been the bedrock of my most important relationships had turned to quicksand, and I was sinking fast. The gnawing feeling in my gut, the primal instinct that screamed that something was terribly wrong, refused to be silenced. I knew I couldn't live in this state of limbo. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. My investigation began quietly, a series of clandestine actions that made me feel like a character in a spy movie, a far cry from the broke college student I was just weeks ago. My first call was to the State Lottery Commission. I posed a simple question, framing it as a general inquiry about prize claims. I asked about the rules regarding joint ownership and what documentation was required at the time of winning. The kind representative on the other end of the line confirmed what I already knew in my heart. Only the person whose name was on the back of the winning ticket could claim the prize. Any claims of joint ownership had to be established at the time of the claim, with all parties present and legally documented. There was no retroactive way for someone to be added as a co-owner. Carter's document wasn't just unethical, it was legally worthless. This small piece of information was a lifeline, a solid piece of ground in the swamp of confusion I was wading through. It was the first crack in Carter's carefully constructed facade. Emboldened, I started digging deeper. I remembered Carter leaving his laptop open on his coffee table during one of my visits. Recalling his password, a combination of his dog's name and his high school football number, something I had known for years, I felt a surge of guilt followed by a wave of resolve. One evening, while he was supposedly out with Sophia, I let myself into his apartment using the spare key he had given me back when we were truly just friends. My hands were slick with sweat as I opened his laptop. The password worked. I dove into his files, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I found a folder labeled Project Phoenix. Inside, the depth of his betrayal was laid bare in stark, terrifying detail. There were multiple drafts of the co-ownership agreement, each one more sophisticated than the last. There were emails between him and a lawyer I'd never heard of, discussing the legal strategy for forcing a settlement. But the most damning evidence was in a separate folder, a collection of text message screenshots between him and Sophia. I scrolled through them, my stomach churning. I read the lies he had fed her, the way he had twisted my actions to paint me as an unstable, greedy monster who was pushing my old friends away. He had systematically turned her against me, using her love for me as a tool to isolate me. He was playing a long game, and I was his pawn. Then I found it, a file named Contingency Plan B. It was a set of documents that made my blood run cold. They were forged tax forms, meticulously crafted to look like official IRS documents. They were designed to look as if I had set up a complex web of offshore accounts to hide my winnings and evade taxes. It was a masterpiece of fraud, a scheme designed to do more than just steal my money. It was designed to ruin my life. He wasn't just going to try and sue me for half. He was going to report me to the IRS, framing me for a federal crime. If he succeeded, I wouldn't just be broke, I'd be facing prison time. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Carter wasn't just a greedy friend trying to cash in. He was a cold, calculating predator, and I was his prey. He had been planning this from the very beginning, from the moment I told him I had won. The $50,000 wasn't a gift, it was seed money for his betrayal. I quickly copied everything onto a flash drive, my hands shaking so badly I could barely click the mouse. I deleted my browsing history, closed the laptop, and slipped out of his apartment, the weight of his treachery pressing down on me. I walked through the quiet streets, the city lights blurring through the tears in my eyes. The boy I had grown up with, the brother I had chosen, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a monster of my own creation, a monster I had unwittingly funded. The game had changed, and I finally understood the stakes. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about survival. The world took on a new, sharper focus after that night. The fog of confusion and self-doubt lifted, replaced by a chilling clarity. Every memory of my friendship with Carter was now tainted, viewed through the lens of his betrayal. The pact we had made as kids, the shared secrets, the laughter, it all felt like a lie, a long con he had been running since we were teenagers. I wasn't just sad or angry, I was filled with a cold, hard resolve. He had wanted to play a game, to treat my life like a business he could hostilely take over. Fine, but he had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated me. He saw the naive, trusting kid who was good at math and bad at confrontation. He didn't see the person who, when pushed into a corner, would fight back with everything he had. The flash drive with his Project Phoenix became my secret weapon, my insurance policy. I knew I couldn't confront him head-on, not yet. He was a spider, and I had just stumbled into his web. I needed to be smarter, more patient. I needed to let him think he was winning. The first move came from him, just as I knew it would. A week after my discovery, a thick, official-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address was from the Internal Revenue Service. My hands trembled as I opened it, but my fear was now mixed with a grim sense of anticipation. Inside was a letter notifying me that my lottery winnings were being audited. The letter cited an anonymous tip regarding potential tax evasion and the use of offshore accounts to conceal assets. It was Carter's contingency plan B, put into motion. He had made his move. He was trying to cripple me, to tie me up in legal red tape and drain my resources with lawyer fees, all while he prepared his civil case for half the money. It was a brilliant, if evil, two-pronged attack. I could almost feel his smug satisfaction from across the city. He probably thought I was panicking, that I was on the phone right now, frantically calling a lawyer and emptying my bank accounts. But I didn't. I just stared at the letter, a slow smile spreading across my face. He had played his hand, and now my turn. My next step was to find an ally, someone who was not part of my old life, someone who couldn't be manipulated by Carter. I researched the best, most ruthless tax attorneys in the state, a man known for taking on impossible cases and winning.
I made an appointment, the flash drive burning a hole in my pocket. Walking into the law firm's plush office, I felt a million miles away from the diner and my cramped college apartment. I laid everything out for the attorney. The lottery win, the friendship, the $50,000 gift, the forged co-ownership agreement, and finally, the contents of the flash drive. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She offered a strategy. She explained that Carter's plan was not only criminal, but also sloppily executed. The digital trail he had left was a prosecutor's dream. She told me that we could not only defend against the IRS audit, but we could also turn the tables, filing a criminal complaint against Carter for fraud, forgery, and filing a false report.
She advised me not to respond to the IRS letter directly. Instead, we would let Carter stew in his own juices for a little while longer. We would let him think his trap was sprung. The final piece of Carter's plan fell into place a few days later. I received a call from my bank. A large withdrawal request had been initiated on my account, an attempt to transfer a significant portion of my remaining winnings to an overseas account. The bank's fraud department had flagged it because the request had come from a new online profile set up using my name and social security number, but with an IP address and security questions that didn't match my records. It was Carter, trying to drain my accounts while I was supposedly distracted by the IRS audit. It was his masterstroke, the move that would leave me penniless and fighting for my freedom. But thanks to my lawyer's warning, I had already put a hold on all large transfers, requiring my in-person signature and multiple forms of identification. His attempt failed. I hung up with the bank, my heart pounding. He had thrown everything he had at me, the forged documents, the IRS audit, the attempted theft. He had shown me his entire hand. My lawyer had been right. He was arrogant and he was sloppy. He thought he was a criminal mastermind, but he was just a desperate man blinded by greed. Now it was my turn to set the trap. The plan was simple. We would let him believe he was still in control. I would play the part of the scared, overwhelmed kid backed into a corner. I would agree to meet with him, to negotiate, to find a way out of this mess, and I would record every second of it. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The stage was set. My lawyer and I spent hours preparing, crafting a narrative of desperation and fear for me to play. I was to be the broken friend, the kid who was in way over his head, terrified of the IRS and willing to do anything to make it all go away. We chose a neutral location, a private room in a quiet, upscale restaurant, a place where Carter would feel comfortable, in control. I wore an old hoodie, the one I used to wear back in our broke days, and made sure my hair was a mess. I practiced my lines in the mirror, my face a mask of contrived anxiety. The plan was to get him to talk, to get him to lay out his entire scheme in his own words. My lawyer had given me a state-of-the-art recording device, a pen that looked completely ordinary but would capture every word, every nuance of his confession. As I drove to the restaurant, a strange calm settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, steely focus. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my life from the person who had tried to steal it. Carter arrived 10 minutes late, a power move he had probably read in some self-help book. He was dressed in a new, expensive suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He looked like a stranger, a caricature of a successful businessman. He didn't bring Sophia. He wanted to face me alone, to exert his dominance without any distractions. He sat down across from me, a condescending smile playing on his lips. He started the conversation by expressing his concern for me, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He talked about the IRS audit as if it were a terrible tragedy that had befallen us both. He laid out his solution. He would help me settle with the IRS using his connections. In exchange, I would sign a new document, one that legally gave him half of my winnings. He framed it as the only way out, the only way to avoid prison and financial ruin. He was a master of manipulation, twisting the situation to make himself the savior and me the fool. I played my part perfectly. I hemmed and hawed, I expressed my doubts, my voice cracking with manufactured emotion. I asked him how he could do this, how he could turn on me like this. That was the opening he was waiting for. His mask slipped. The condescending smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. He leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. He told me everything. He confessed to forging the documents, to manipulating Sophia, to sending the anonymous tip to the IRS. He laughed as he described my panic, his eyes gleaming with a malicious light. He told me I was always the weak one, the follower, and that he was just taking what he was owed for years of carrying our friendship. He even admitted to trying to drain my bank account, calling me an idiot for not having better security. He was so confident, so arrogant in his belief that he had me cornered, that he didn't see the trap. He didn't notice the way I casually placed the pen on the table between us, its recording light a tiny, unblinking eye. He laid out his entire criminal enterprise, a confession so complete and so damning, it was almost poetic. As I drove to the restaurant, a strange calm settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, steely focus. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my life from the person who had tried to steal it. Carter arrived 10 minutes late, a power move he had probably read in some self-help book. He was dressed in a new, expensive suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He looked like a stranger, a caricature of a successful businessman. He didn't bring Sophia. He wanted to face me alone, to exert his dominance without any distractions. He sat down across from me, a condescending smile playing on his lips. He started the conversation by expressing his concern for me, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He talked about the IRS audit as if it were a terrible tragedy that had befallen us both. He laid out his solution. He would help me settle with the IRS using his connections. In exchange, I would sign a new document, one that legally gave him half of my winnings. He framed it as the only way out, the only way to avoid prison and financial ruin. He was a master of manipulation, twisting the situation to make himself the savior and me the fool. I played my part perfectly. I hemmed and hawed, I expressed my doubts, my voice cracking with manufactured emotion. I asked him how he could do this, how he could turn on me like this. That was the opening he was waiting for. His mask slipped. The condescending smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. He leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. He told me everything. He confessed to forging the documents, to manipulating Sophia, to sending the anonymous tip to the IRS. He laughed as he described my panic, his eyes gleaming with a malicious light. He told me I was always the weak one, the follower, and that he was just taking what he was owed for years of carrying our friendship. He even admitted to trying to drain my bank account, calling me an idiot for not having better security. He was so confident, so arrogant in his belief that he had me cornered, that he didn't notice the way I casually placed the pen on the table between us, its recording light a tiny, unblinking eye. He laid out his entire criminal enterprise, a confession so complete and so damning it was almost poetic.
When he was finished, he leaned back in his chair, a look of triumphant satisfaction on his face. He thought he had broken me. He slid the new agreement across the table, along with a pen for me to sign. I looked at the document, then back at him. The performance was over. My expression changed, the fear and anxiety melting away to be replaced by a cold, hard stillness. I slowly picked up the recording pen, holding it up so he could see it. I told him, in a calm, quiet voice, that our entire conversation had been recorded. I told him that every word he had just said, every confession, every admission of guilt was now on that device. I told him that my lawyer was listening to the whole thing in real time from a car outside. The color drained from Carter's face. His triumphant smirk dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He looked from the pen to my face, his eyes wide with disbelief. The reality of his situation crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He wasn't the hunter, he was the prey. He wasn't the mastermind, he was the fool. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled, guttural sound came out. I stood up, leaving the unsigned agreement on the table. I looked at the man who had been my brother, the architect of my downfall, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of finality. I walked out of the room, leaving him alone with the wreckage of his own making. The recording pen felt heavy in my hand, not just a piece of technology, but the symbol of my emancipation. The game was over. I had won. The days following the confrontation were a blur of controlled chaos. The evidence was irrefutable. The recording, the documents from his Project Phoenix folder, the bank's fraud report, they all painted a clear and damning picture of a premeditated, multifaceted criminal conspiracy. My lawyer moved swiftly and decisively. We didn't just defend against the IRS audit, we went on the offensive. We presented the full slate of evidence to a federal prosecutor. The IRS audit was dropped immediately, replaced by a criminal investigation into Carter. The forged co-ownership agreement became the centerpiece of a lawsuit for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Carter's life, the one he had tried to build with my money, came crashing down around him. The expensive suits were repossessed, the slick friends disappeared, and the connections he boasted about turned out to be as fictitious as his business ventures. He was arrested at his apartment, charged with multiple felonies, including forgery, fraud, and filing a false report with a federal agency. The last I heard, he was facing a significant prison sentence, a fitting end for a man who had tried to steal my future. The fallout with Sophia was quieter but no less painful. The full weight of Carter's manipulation came crashing down on her. She called me, her voice a choked, broken whisper, apologizing profusely. She told me he had preyed on her insecurities, twisting her love for me into a weapon against me. She explained how he had convinced her I was changing, that I was becoming someone she no longer knew, and that she was helping me by siding with him. I listened to her apologies, my heart a strange mix of pity and detachment. I understood that she was a victim too, but the trust was broken, shattered into a million pieces, just like my friendship with Carter. Her belief in him, her willingness to doubt me, had created a chasm between us that I didn't know how or if I wanted to cross. We met one last time, in a coffee shop, the neutral territory of our early dates. The conversation was stilted, sad. There were no more accusations, just the quiet, heavy silence of what had been lost. In the end, we both knew it was over. She couldn't look at me without being reminded of her own betrayal, and I couldn't look at her without being reminded of his. We parted ways with a hollow hug, a final, sad closing of a chapter. In the aftermath, as the legal dust settled, I was left with my fortune and my freedom, but also with a profound sense of loss. I had lost my best friend and my girlfriend, two of the most important people in my life. The money, which had once felt like a dream come true, now felt like a tainted prize, a reward for a painful lesson in human nature. I spent weeks in my condo, surrounded by the things I had bought, feeling more alone than ever before. But slowly, I began to rebuild. I took my lawyer's advice and became fiercely protective of my finances and my privacy. I fired the slick financial advisor Carter had introduced me to and found a trustworthy, low-key firm to manage my assets. I paid off my parents' mortgage, a silent gesture of gratitude for their years of support. I set up a scholarship fund at my old community college for students like me, kids who were working hard and just needed a break. It was my way of turning the tainted money into something good, something that could help instead of hurt. I went back to school, but I changed my major. I was no longer studying for a practical, stable career. I enrolled in a filmmaking program, a passion I had always been too afraid to pursue. The money gave me the freedom to follow my dreams, the real dreams, not the ones dictated by financial necessity. I started writing, directing small projects, channeling my experience into my art. I learned to be more discerning with my trust, to value quality over quantity in my relationships. I made new friends, people who knew me as Jordan, the aspiring filmmaker, not Jordan, the lottery winner. The scars of Carter's betrayal remained, a permanent reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind a friendly face. But they no longer defined me. They became a part of my story, a crucible that had burned away my naivety and forged me into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. One evening, months later, I stood on the balcony of my condo, looking out at the city lights.
The same city Carter and I had once looked at together, dreaming of a better life. I had that better life now, but it was different than I had imagined. It was quieter, more solitary, but it was mine. I had built it myself, not with money, but with the hard-won lessons of betrayal and survival. I was no longer the kid who won the lottery. I was the man who had survived it. And as I watched the sunset, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I knew that my greatest fortune wasn't the $2.3 million. It was the chance to start over, to build a life on a foundation of my own making, stronger and more real than ever before.